This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for downloading another episode on the Detroit Sports Podcast Network. This is the Detroit Sports Countdown Podcast, where we rank the top 5 stories in the world of Detroit sports, and lots of news and notes to get to, lots of exciting things that we got to talk about in the world of Detroit sports. I got a lot to talk about. I am the Doc, John Macaroon. I just want to thank everybody who downloads this podcast and the many other podcasts across our platform on the Detroit Sports Podcast Network. Want to thank our fine sponsors, Fanatic U, Detroit Beard Collective, Team Top Cat Sales. We greatly appreciate all those that have helped us to keep this network running and to keep all the podcasts on the air each and every week. Well, when we start off this podcast, we like to do what we call the Kenny Frenzel Honorable Mentions, where we talk about some stories that hit the newswire that do not make the top 5, but are very interesting. The Detroit Lions, Bob Quinn is shaking up the front office, and what is highly expected. He is trying to shape the organization in terms of scouting, in terms of, hiring the strength and conditioning coach in the likeness that he sees fit. You don't find it surprising that he's bringing in guys that he knows, that has close relationships with, and is setting up their front office similar to what New England has. And so this week the Lions have added Michael McCarthy to the coaching staff. They've added an ex-Patriot assistant to run the strength program. And recently, earlier today, they've added Maryland's former head coach, Randy Edsall, to be the new director of football research and special projects, which is a position that Ernie Adams held similarly with the Patriots. And so Edsall was the head coach at UConn in 1999 and Maryland from 2011 to 2015. He also has some NFL coaching experience coaching the defensive backs for the Jaguars and has played football at Syracuse. So Bob Quinn is reshaping the front office. He's fired long-term people there at the Lions who've been there for quite a bit of time, and now he's starting to bring in his own people. And so far, so good. You like to see that he brings in people with experience that have some football wherewithal and have the ability to really understand what's going to happen. And the biggest thing that Bob Quinn has to do is really make sure that the people in the scouting department, whether it be on the pro side, available free agents, who ends up on the waiver wire, he just has to make sure that he finds the right personnel and the right people to bring in better talent for the Lions. So Bob Quinn shaking things up in the front office and starting to really bring in his people. The Kenny Frenzel honorable mention for this week. Now, let's get to the countdown. The top 5 stories as ranked by the Doc. To kick things off, it really seems like around town in terms of people watching the University of Michigan and what they've been doing in terms of recruiting. There's been a lot of buzz regarding the whole scenario in terms of Michigan, not honoring some verbal commitments in terms of, having some players that they've had committed to the University of Michigan to play football. The University of Michigan extends an offer for a scholarship. But then, at the same time, the recruiting process is still open. So Michigan's job and Coach Jim Harbaugh's job is to go out there and find the best football players. When you have an open recruiting process, sometimes you go out there and when you survey the landscape, you find better guys. And so what's been happening is Michigan has had really an up and down kind of recruiting process now under Jim Harbaugh for the first time in his first go-around because he is trying to bring in the best talent. And what ends up happening is when you find guys that are really talented, you end up having too many recruits at one position maybe, or you find a better guy at a certain position. And so some players have been told that, hey, you know what, the University of Michigan is going to, no longer honor that verbal commitment and you're no longer going to come play football for the university. A lot of people are up in arms because they're not used to seeing that at the University of Michigan, but this is a common practice, and so people are now getting to see it because these athletes are starting to tweet out like, hey, I'm no longer going to Michigan. And you have some athletes who have been recruited for several years, who have been committed to the University of Michigan for several years, and they're coming out and discussing what's going on. And the other tough part, which we discussed on the Doc and Jock podcast, was we only hear the story from the side of the commit. The universities and coaches cannot talk about what's going on prior to signing day, and most of the time you're not really going to hear what actually happened from the university side. So you're only getting one side of the story. But people are up in arms because, the word commitment is like a verbal contract. People really honor words and honor, like, hey, you have your word, and if you make a commitment verbally, then you're supposed to honor it. But in the world of big-time college football, that's just not the case on both sides. You have stories of commits who reopen recruiting after, going on these trips. These recruits are allowed to go on multiple visits, and sometimes they get wowed in certain scenarios. They make a commitment, and then, they go on another trip and they just get wowed again, and they end up, you got to remember, these are sometimes 16, 17-year-old kids making verbal commitments, and they're not prepared mentally to make these kind of tough choices all the time, and sometimes they're going to change their mind. So I really personally don't have a problem with it. It's not a big deal. I just think that a lot of people are up in arms because of the whole concept of, hey, your word is your bond. That's all you have is your word, and things like that. But it's a game that's played on both sides. These athletes and the universities are playing within the rules, and in big-time college football, this is how it goes, because, when you got a lot of money on the line and, big-time college football, you got to get the best players, and that's Jim Harbaugh's job. His job is to go out there, find the best players for the University of Michigan, and that is how you elevate the stature of the program and things like that. And this is not new to Jim Harbaugh. Being a head coach in Stanford, he's probably had to, go up against USC, UCLA, other big-time programs out there in the West Coast and the Pac-10 in order to get players. So Michigan's recruiting is still within the rules, and Jim Harbaugh is doing everything it takes to get the best players out there, and I find no problem with it. And those who are up in arms probably want to restructure recruiting in terms of making it like a verbal binding contract, where if a commit gives his word or a school gives their word, they're going to give a scholarship, that they have to honor it. And if you believe that, I can understand that point of view, but at the same time, looking at it from what's actually happening, I understand it. The best college football players need to be recruited to the best schools, and that is the name of the game. And if you don't like it, then unfortunately, keep an eye out what's going on, because it's going to happen for a lot more. So with the advent of Twitter, with the advent of social media, and you're going to hear more and more about maybe the seedier side of recruiting. So that's the number 5 story this week in the world of Detroit sports, the whole issue regarding Michigan recruiting and recruiting as a whole. The number 4 story this week in Detroit sports. Earlier this week, some stories and rumors came out regarding Calvin Johnson and a proposed situation that might facilitate Calvin Johnson coming back. It was a very fascinating look at what NFL players and teams might look to do going forward in order to keep these high-profile athletes on the field, knowing that there's concussions, knowing that repeated hits. And the NFL and pro football is a violent sport where it's a collision sport, game in, game out, and a lot of young athletes that are playing football retiring early. They're looking at the seriousness of these concussions, and so the schedule, how these athletes are used, is really being looked at and monitored. A story that came out earlier this week involved Calvin Johnson, and it involved a situation that might allow him to come back to the Lions, but with a reduced schedule. And how it went was, and kind of how the story evolved was, now this is not being demanded by Calvin Johnson. This is a proposed scenario that may be being proposed by outside forces, the Lions, but what's being proposed is allowing Calvin Johnson to play one more season with the Lions. Granted that they look at his cap number, because that number at $24 million is just going to be way restricting for the Lions. So I would assume that if Calvin Johnson does come back, he will look to restructure that number and to help the Lions out for sure, because at $24 million, the Lions cannot look to keep Calvin Johnson. But the proposed scenario would be he'd play on Sundays, he'd be allowed to do whatever he wanted on Monday and Tuesday, and he could go back to Atlanta, his hometown. He would not be required to report to Allen Park on Monday or Tuesday. And then what's been happening lately is he's been limited in practice for the better part of a couple of seasons now, where he doesn't practice all that much during the week, which allows him to stay healthy and fresh for Sundays, because he's been torn up, he's been often injured with his hands, his legs, his ankles, which is kind of really a struggle for him to get on the field week in, week out. The 2015 season was the first season in a couple where Calvin played the majority of the games. So what will happen is Calvin Johnson will be allowed to have a reduced reduced schedule, will be able to rest and recuperate at his own pace and report back to the facility on Wednesday, which will likely end up seeing him not all that involved in practice, just resting and recuperating week in, week out in order to get through a 16-game schedule. Would Calvin Johnson be willing to take a schedule like that? It may help him. More and more NFL teams may look to do that with these players. When you look at some proposed 18-game schedules, a lot of people are saying, okay, if you want to get rid of the preseason games and you want to tack on 2 more games to the schedule, but you allow that you have an 18-game schedule, but you only allow the NFL players to play in 14 games, that would limit the number of games an NFL professional athlete would be allowed to participate in, which may also, be a way of extending their career. So a lot of people are looking at different ways and different avenues of extending careers because a lot of guys are not making it past, their early 30s playing professional football. And I can understand that now. When you start college football at 18, you're playing more and more games now with the college football playoff. You're having some teams playing 15 games in a season in college. So each game that you play is one less game potentially and one more game that you're looking at that will affect your career. And so there has to be serious conversations in terms of how to extend these guys' careers, because when you look at it, playing basketball, playing baseball is really a much better opportunity and it provides you an opportunity as an athlete to play much longer than professional football. And it's really getting scary. These guys are looking at it and going, when you weigh the pros and cons of playing football, you get a lot of money out front, but it's like a deal with the devil. Would you be willing to go down that road and play a professional sport where your brain could have lesions, where you could end up not being able to walk or function normally? You have athletes coming out saying that they will go in their own kitchens, will open up the refrigerator, and will stand there for 5 or 6 minutes not knowing where they are or why they opened the fridge in the first place. Memory issues, prolonged health issues, multiple surgeries after their career. The NFL and their players really are going to, again, take a long look at what is the toll of playing professional football on your body. These athletes start to look at it. They are really starting to say, okay, it's not really worth it. It's not really for me. And so that's why this scenario with Calvin Johnson will be interesting if he decides to take it and come back for one more year and decide, I can maybe try to do it one more year to stay in the league, to play with the Lions, if I can get a reduced schedule and just really basically go game to game and not do much during the week, because he's a veteran. He knows the offense now, and so he might have an opportunity to be able to thrive in this situation, not having to report day in and day out. So the situation with Calvin Johnson and a potential scenario in which he returns, the number 4 story this week in Detroit sports. Moving along on the countdown, this 14th edition of the Detroit Sports Countdown, we're going to take a look at some issues going on with the Pistons and basketball around town as well. We're going to take a look at the Pistons and some things going on with Andre Drummond in the next couple spots on the countdown. The number 3 story this week, the Detroit Pistons struggles the last couple games, Friday, Saturday. They had a good start to the week, but the Pistons had a situation where they're going to come up against a tough schedule, and it kicked off with a home game versus the Cavaliers, followed by a tough road game versus Toronto, 2 top teams in the Eastern Conference. It gives you a chance to look at what these Pistons have, and man, it was a tough struggle. I mean, the Cavaliers brought their A game, and when they do that, when a lot of things are working well for them, it makes it super tough for the Pistons to be able to play a solid brand of basketball. And then it's always super tough when the Pistons go out and play back-to-back games, and it just seems like this year their ability to have success in the second games of a back-to-back hasn't been that well. But, and obviously what starts to happen when you watch the Pistons on the back end of a back-to-back is you got tired legs, you start making a lot more mistakes, and the Pistons just, fouled they fouled the Raptors on so many occasions. It just was a game in which, they struggled early, but again, they don't give up in games. They will compete for the majority of 48 minutes, but what made it a challenge was they just didn't have their legs under them. Defensively, you could see they were a little bit step slow, and when you're a step slow, what tends to happen is you foul, you make you start using your hands too much, hand checking, and you start to see that when a team has a step on you, that you start to foul a lot more. And you could see the noted foul advantage when the Pistons took on Toronto. So they went 0-2 in their last couple games, and now you're starting to say, okay, should the Pistons be buyers at the trade deadline? Do we need another forward to come in here? What is it going to look like when Andre Drummond and Reggie Jackson aren't clicking on all cylinders? It really is concerning to see what is going on with the Pistons when they're off. I mean, you did play the top two teams in the Eastern Conference, so there is solace in that, but you didn't get any victories versus those teams. And you start to look at, okay, where do the Pistons slot as a playoff team? And they're likely going to slot, if they make it, as a 6 or a 7 or an 8 seed. So you might end up facing Cleveland or Toronto in those early rounds, and you're like, oh, okay. Cleveland, you obviously would expect them to struggle in a series versus Toronto. You might go deep in a series with them, depending on if you could really play solidly in front of your home fans at the Palace. But when Toronto's clicking on all cylinders, they play a solid brand of basketball, and you're going to need some bigger contributions from guys like Brandon Jennings, from Ersan Ilyasova, who was out versus Toronto, and you could see a little bit of a difference there. And so when Ersan is out, he had I believe a thigh injury, and he was unable to play in the second leg of a back-to-back game. So the Pistons got a tough schedule ahead. I mean, they play some solid teams, and so again, they're right around 500. They need to be able to really play a much more consistent brand of basketball. And so, people were looking at that schedule going, oh man, home against Cleveland, on the road versus Toronto is kind of a tough situation. But, that's what happened, and the Pistons were not able to capitalize on the opportunities that they had to really kind of cement their spot as a 6 or 7 seed. Right now, they're sitting at 25 and 23, but they do have a schedule upcoming that they can manage as long as they play well. So it's something that we want to see. I think most people believe that it's time now for the Pistons to get back to making the playoffs. And if you stay tuned, the next story is going to involve a key component to the Pistons' success, and one that's being talked about quite a bit in regards to his play, his effort on the court, and whether or not we can see some further improvement with this player. All right, the number 2 story this week in Detroit sports involves Andre Drummond. All kudos to him. Lots of young talent in Detroit, and lots of credit is being given nationally to some fine young athletes here in the state of Michigan and that play for our Detroit teams. Andre Drummond was selected to be a reserve for the All-Star game. Lots of props to Andre Drummond for that accolade, and he deserves it. He's averaging 17 points, I believe, 15 rebounds, and he's been given, an opportunity to play in a game that showcases the fine talent across the NBA. And Andre Drummond is well deserving of that. But in looking at Andre Drummond, a lot more people are looking at this whole free throw thing and going, okay, this is a mark against him. And this is a guy that is in line, whether you believe he deserves it or not, is in line for a max contract. So he's going to be a player that's going to take up a lot of money on your salary cap for several years to come. So the Pistons are going to tie their futures financially to Reggie Jackson and Andre Drummond. And when you do that, then to those that are given much is expected. And so when those two guys are going to be your biggest big time players and earning the most money, you're going to have to demand a lot more from them. And so a guy that's shooting that poorly on free throws is something to really take a look at and go, okay, now. And so Andre Drummond in games is starting to get heckled. There are fans out there who are going out and really commenting on, hey, what are some scenarios that can help Andre Drummond improve your free throw and improve his free throws, whether it be shooting underhand, whether it be trying different avenues of improving that shot. People are noticing, okay, he cannot be on the court in key situations if he's going to continue to be well under 50% in terms of free throw shooting. This guy is a marquee player, and I know big men struggle in terms of making free throws, but a lot of people are thinking this is a mental thing. This guy's making them in practice. He's practicing quite a bit, but when he struggles, it really, I think, affects other parts of his game as well when he struggles, at the free throw line. You start noticing that on the defensive end, why is he getting out-rebounded by others? You start noticing that on the offensive end, that his rebounding dips a little bit. And so what tends to happen is, I wonder if the struggles at the free throw line are affecting his confidence, which then in turn, may affect his play overall on the offensive defensive side of the floor. And so a guy like Andre Drummond can be dominant. This is a guy that can hit 20 points, 20 rebounds consistently. But when the team struggles, you need to see it as well, the effort defensively. And so a lot of people are starting to point out, okay, we're starting to see that the team's defense when the Pistons struggle is something that is becoming a challenge, and one that people are looking like, if Andre Drummond and Reggie Jackson aren't going to bring it night in, night out, is this financial commitment that we've made to these two players going to be worth it? Which is a fair question, but I do believe Andre Drummond is going to really challenge himself to evolve. You got to remember, a young player who's not even anywhere near his prime. So this is a guy that NBA teams would be willing to take chances on, and the Pistons will. The Pistons will definitely give a max deal to, and hopefully he will develop and make us all proud and continue to, put up all-star caliber performances. Now, a point of reference that we are seeing, and a lot of people are talking about a little bit on the down low, is that Andre Drummond has a hobby that a lot of people in town are kind of noticing, because, he is showing up at these nightclubs, bars as a DJ. DJ Andre Drummond is out and about trying to, get the party started, putting out some, and trying to put out some entertaining mixes for everyone out there trying to, have a good time at the club. It'll be interesting to, if you're out there out and about in Detroit and you're having a good time out there with a friend, and all of a sudden you see Andre Drummond and his crew out there in the DJ booth trying to, make the party start and keep the party going. I'm not sure exactly how I feel. I'm always of the opinion that during the regular season, you probably want to devote 110% to the craft. Not saying that you don't go out, or not saying that you don't have a social life outside of your job, but if you're going to be a guy at that highest level to succeed, I do believe that whole DJ situation has to be put on hold. Do that in the off season. In the regular season, you can't be going out there DJing. I respect that you have a lot of interest and you want to learn something different, and it might be a way of stress relief. But there's a lot more negatives and a lot more things that can that are cons and negative with him DJing during the regular season. If you follow him on Instagram, you can find out where he plays, and he DJs as well with people that I know personally. But just my opinion is he should worth 110% effort on the court during the season, and then 110% effort on whatever his personal hobbies are off the court in his free time in the off season. How can you shoot well under 50% in your free throws and then go out and then struggle in certain parts of your game and then go out on a Wednesday evening and then go out and DJ? Where's your mind at? I'm just thinking that a player that wants to be elite. Now, of course, he's got natural talent, he's got size, he has the ability to be a productive NBA player. I'm talking about what's that difference between a guy that's average and the guy that's above average, and the difference between a guy that's elite. I don't think, Draymond Green, Steph Curry, Klay Thompson are out there DJing during, the regular season. And I don't think there's probably anybody else in the NBA that's out there, spinning the records during the course of a, 82 game regular season. I just don't see that as being a productive thing that Andre should be doing. Now, I could be wrong. This could be a stress relief. This could be something that he does that he finds to be relaxing, that helps him get his mind off the game. But I just think that you need to devote a lot of bad things can happen in the nighttime, whether it be situations that involve alcohol, whether it be, unruly fans that want to, hulk up in front of them and talk trash. I just think that him being out in the spotlight in the nightlife in Detroit, in the Detroit area, is not the best for him, and so that's why I just disagree with that. He should not be DJing. Put the computer down. Put the DJ board down. Worry about that kind of stuff in the off season, and during the regular season, just make sure you boost that free throw percentage. Focus on the defense. Watch that extra film, and really dedicate yourself to being the guy that's going to be worthy of producing consistent numbers and earning a max deal. All right, you've waited. Thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for supporting the many podcasts on this network. We greatly appreciate it. Your support allows us to give away free stuff through Fanatic U, through other contests as well. So we greatly appreciate it. Quick reminder, you can go over to fanaticu.com and use the promo code DSP at checkout. And anytime you use that promo code DSP, you'll save 15% off your entire order. Anytime at all. And if you do that, then you'll be entered to also win free stuff that we give away as a result of your great support. So fanaticu.com, Detroit Sports official outfitter, a great online store for gear. When you check out, use the promo code DSP. You'll save 15% off your entire order and be entered to win some free stuff through the Detroit Sports Podcast Network and fanaticu.com. All right, you've waited. Thank you. Not too many times I get a chance to just sit, enjoy an NHL All-Star Skills competition, but because Dylan Larkin, 19 years old, was making his debut, got a chance to sit and watch, and oh boy, lit Twitter ablaze with his speed. Dude was in the speed competition where, rather simple, you go around the rink one time as fast as you can. And the record had stood for 20 years. And Dylan Larkin, 19 years old, is going around the ice, and you start noticing the buzz starts happening like, dude is flying across the ice. Gets to 3/4 of the way there and slips. Keeps going, stays on his feet, and when he crosses the center red line for a full lap around the NHL rink, got across there in NHL record fashion. Broke a record that was 20 years old. And when you watch the tape, if you go anywhere on Twitter or watch any of the highlights, dude is just fast as all hell, and he was flying down the ice, and even with slipping, broke the NHL record in terms of the speed in which he got across the NHL ice, and it was amazing. And then when you watched the breakaway relay, he scored on both goals. You got to see him puck handling. You got to see him do some unbelievable type things, and on the national stage, he was starting to get that respect, but front and center on, in the NHL skills competition is where a lot of people start also raising their profile. And Dylan Larkin did just that. And he makes the Detroit Sports Countdown list again and the number one spot for his performance at the NHL All-Star Skills Competition. What a fun environment where a Red Wing is out there doing his thing, showcasing his talent at such a young age. And it's refreshing because for a long time, there weren't very many young athletes in Detroit where we could say, okay, this is a young superstar, not only locally, but nationally. And Dylan Larkin has that potential of being a top 5 NHL player rather quickly in his career. Probably before the age of 21, he might be a top 5, top 6 overall NHL player. And what he's done this year with the Red Wings has been outstanding. It's been fun to watch, and it's fun to see him showcasing his talents nationally. And it was great to see at the NHL All-Star Skills Competition. He wears the Red Wing winged wheel very well, and he's a guy that, you could look to say this could be a future captain of the club. He's got poise, he's got supreme talent, and he's got the ability that, you look for in a guy that can lead your team, can put the puck in the net, is a plus player. A lot of good things happen when he's on the ice, and he's a young, developing player and one that the Red Wings are counting on to really produce and help them this season, help them push to that 25th straight playoff appearance. When you say that, wow, 25 years straight making a postseason in a professional sport. Now, that's something to say, and Dylan Larkin is a key component of that. Now, some people are also looking at the goaltending situation with the Wings, and even some people here on the network have some disdain for Jimmy Howard. I just think some more patience is needed. Peter Mrazek's doing his thing. I think Jimmy Howard's going to play a little bit better in the second half if he gets a little bit more time in the net, but Peter Mrazek needs to be showcased for sure, play the majority of the games, and Jimmy Howard just needs to stay sharp just in case something happens. But, right now the situation with the Red Wings is looking up. If you're buying and selling on the Red Wings, you definitely should buy. I think that The one area that the Red Wings definitely need to work on is the consistent scoring across the four lines. They are struggling a little bit in terms of putting the puck in the net, but I think this All-Star break came at the right time, and hopefully it's a scenario in which these guys can come back refreshed and can come back and, really take over the second half of the season and really earn points in the majority of their games to continue to have success and earn a respectable playoff spot. Dylan Larkin, again, I'm looking forward to seeing what he does in the All-Star game in the new format. The Pro Bowl, not really looking forward to it. I'm not into it really all that much. But the NHL, I might check it out because they had a new format, 3-on-3 or whatever situation they decided to try to spruce up that whole event. So we'll check into it. But the number one story this week, Detroit Sports Countdown Podcast, Dylan Larkin showcasing his supreme talents. Woo-wee. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you for supporting us. Thank you for listening to our many podcasts and going to our website, DetroitSportsPodcast.com. It's greatly appreciated. All the support they've shown us on our Twitter page at Detroit Podcast allows us to have all these contests, have all these giveaways, and allows us to continue to support our sponsors and those who host our podcast. So finally, want to thank the DetroitSportsNation.com website. They have been greatly supportive to us. They host all our podcasts on their great website. So if you want to read great articles, check out some news and notes regarding Detroit sports. One great website is DetroitSportsNation.com. Thank you for tuning in to another episode on the Detroit Sports Countdown Podcast. I appreciate you listening, and if you have any feedback, feel free. Message us at Detroit Podcast. See everybody next week.